What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So, we're back with day 2 of our trade deadline coverage. This time, we're going to talk about Victor Oladipo getting traded to the Miami Heat. This was one that was certainly, relatively expected, especially in reference to the trade that we talked about yesterday, Vucevic to the Bulls. If you missed that video, go check it out from yesterday. But this one here is very interesting, and it sort of reframes the way that we look at the James Harden deal from a couple of months ago. So I wanted to talk about what this means for Miami, and honestly more so what this means for the Rockets, because I think this is pretty huge. So the deal is Victor Oladipo for Avery Bradley, Kelly Olynyk, and swap rights in 2022. So that is next year's draft, not this offseason, but next year's. And those swap rights also include the Brooklyn Nets pick. So basically the way that this works is the Rockets get the best pick out of their own pick, Miami's pick, or Brooklyn's pick. And if you have the Rockets as being a better team than either the Nets or the Heat next year, you should probably be drug tested immediately, because that's just not going to happen. The Rockets are horrible. Those other two teams are contenders. So that swap, unless something catastrophic happens to either of those other two teams in terms of injuries or trade requests or whatever, that swap is basically going to be nothing. So it's really just Oladipo for Avery Bradley and Kelly Olynyk. Also relevant in this is the fact that Kelly Olynyk is a free agent this offseason. Avery Bradley has a team option for about $6 million, so they can decline that, and I assume that they probably will given their state as a team. So basically, they got nothing back for this. Before I get into the Houston stuff, because I do want to spend a bit of time on that, I do want to talk about the fit for Oladipo in Miami. This makes sense for them. I mean, like I said, they pretty much gave up nothing. Like, yes, Olynyk was a rotation player for them. He was technically their starting power forward, and he was a guy who did play minutes for them even last year in the playoffs and in their finals run, and this season he was playing, but it's not like he's, an integral part of their team. Avery Bradley's pretty much been hurt all year, so he really wasn't much for them either. And like I said, that pick swap is basically nothing. So they have pretty much no risk on Oladipo. Yes, you could argue, okay, well, they should have just waited until this summer and signed him in free agency, because it's the worst kept secret in the NBA that Oladipo wanted to go to the Heat. That was his preferred destination all along. He's wanted to be there probably for a couple years now, and he finally gets his wish, gets to go to Miami and play. And, they had cap space, so he could have, been the guy they brought in the offseason. But the plus side to this is that they get to take a look at him medically, see how his injury stuff is doing, and, if he plays well for them, then they'll have first crack at re-signing him this summer, and if they want him back, they're certainly going to be able to get him back. Who knows what the number is going to be for the contract? We'll have to see how he plays the rest of the year, but they get to bring him in for this postseason run, as well as potentially retaining him long-term. I think this is a major win for the Heat. Obviously, he doesn't, he's not that all-star level player anymore, and he probably doesn't really swing the title race. I think the Heat were a contender before they brought him in, and I think they still are now. It doesn't make them that much better. I do think they are a better team, but it's not like it's, making them a favorite over the Nets and the Lakers if they're healthy and all that kind of thing. So I think, the Heat are still good. They were good before. This is just the rich get richer. I have no problems with them doing this. I think it makes them better, but it's not like, an earth-shattering move for them. And here we go. Time for the Houston Rockets rant, because they have made a mistake here. Basically, the James Harden trade ends up being just picks for them, because Oladipo, they traded him, like I said, for pretty much nothing. So they got just basically picks for James Harden and matching salary, and like Dante Exum and Rudions Kurucs, who they've already traded. So they pretty much got nothing back except for those draft picks. And don't get me wrong, those picks could be valuable. I talked about that when James Harden got traded. I still hold that opinion that, the Nets could potentially not be a very good team in a couple of years, depending on what happens with their stars. As we know, Durant, Kyrie, James Harden, neither of them stick in one place for too long, so there's a chance that this breaks up or one of them gets hurt and the team just isn't very good anymore when those picks start being due. So maybe the Rockets are good in a couple of years, but as of right now, the trade looks pretty bad, because they just got nothing. They got nothing for a guy who is playing at an MVP level right now, has won MVPs before, is clearly one of the top 6-7 players in the entire NBA, one of the best scorers in the league, not only in the league right now, but in the history of the game. And I get the trade request and I get all of that, but when you could have had Ben Simmons and there was probably some other packages out there, or you could have just held on to him for a little longer, it starts to look pretty bad for Houston. And I said it at the time, and I'm going to double down on this because I don't see a lot of people talking about this angle. Everyone is asking, well, why didn't they just get Karis LeVert and why didn't they just keep Jarrett Allen? Why? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Why would they trade those players when it's clearly better than what they ended up with? Because you could have had Jarrett Allen, who's playing really well for the Cavs and is probably going to get a payday in the offseason, and you could have had Karis LeVert, who had the injury scare, the cancer scare, and obviously that's, he's had that taken care of, and it's good to see him back out on the court, but you could have had him, who, since he's been back for the Pacers for the last week or so, has also been playing some pretty good basketball and is under contract for a couple more years. And the reason, it was obvious to me at the time, and it still is now, it was purely a money thing, you guys. It was purely like the Rockets did not want the Karis LeVert contract, and they probably weren't going to bring back Victor Oladipo this offseason anyway. I think the plan all along was to trade him for more picks. They didn't really get that, unfortunately, but I think that was their plan the whole time, because LeVert's under contract for like, 3-4 more seasons after this one, and Oladipo was going to be a free agent, and Jarrett Allen was, scheduled to be a restricted free agent, and they were going to have to pay him in the offseason, and instead they just wanted the future draft capital. So this was clearly a plan of, we don't want this long-term money on our books. We're going to trade away all of our contracts and just become as cheap as possible. And that is on Tillman Fertitta, the owner. And it's pretty clear what his strategy as the owner of the Houston Rockets is going to be. When he became the owner a couple of years ago, the team was really good. That was James Harden there, and they were still, competing for championships, and he was willing to do that for a couple of seasons. But, the Chris Paul thing happened, and then Russell Westbrook wanted out, and James Harden did, and you just get to this point where, clearly the players don't really want to play for this owner. Clearly he's not willing to foot the bill for a championship team, and he'll come out and say it. He'll say that we're willing to, pay whatever if it means being good, and he'll say all the right things to the media, but through his actions you can tell that he's just not willing to pay for a title level team at this point. Now maybe he'll come back around, eventually if they have some luck in the draft and they're looking like an up and coming team. Maybe at that point they'll invest in trades and free agency and pay for an expensive roster. But at the moment, with Fertitta specifically, him having been, invested in the restaurant and hospitality business, which, as we know, has been hit very hard over the past year or so, given the events that have gone on in the world, and, the NBA losing money because they haven't been able to have fans in the stands. This is a guy who is very careful about his finances, and he wants to, remain as rich as he can. So the GM and all the Rockets front office, they have their hands tied at this point, because there's just nothing they can do to upgrade this roster if the owner is not going to be willing to commit to paying for these guys, right? We've seen it through their actions over and over again. This is why they did not keep Jarrett Allen and Karis LeVert. This is why. There's no other reason why, because it would have made them a better basketball team. I think Raphael Stone, the GM of the Rockets, I think he knew that. I think Steven Silas knew that. I think everybody else in the front office knew that, it's probably a better move to keep LeVert and Allen rather than rolling the dice on Victor Oladipo, who's about to be a free agent, and just getting a bunch of picks, because, they would have been a better team, but it's just they weren't willing to pay that long-term money for those guys, and that's where the Rockets are as a franchise. So honestly, I feel bad for Rockets fans. Like, I've talked about this before, but as a Warriors guy, I have had some run-ins with Rockets fans over the past 5 years. That was a big playoff rivalry, specifically those 2 years where they met, the Chris Paul years, where the Rockets and Warriors met in the playoffs, and I've spent a lot of time arguing with Rockets fans online and all of that, right? And it's all in good fun, it's part of being a fan in the NBA, and that's why playoff rivalries are super fun, because you can talk trash to other people, and that's just part of what makes sports, a fun thing to do, right? So I've had my run-ins with Rockets fans in the past, but I do honestly feel really bad for fans of this team right now, because it's just like they're coming off a 5-6 year run where they were really good, and they got this close to a title, and you can talk about hypotheticals of Chris Paul's hamstring or the 27 missed threes or all of that stuff, right? of how they were this close, and maybe they should have won one of those rings, maybe they shouldn't have. Nobody can know for sure because things happened the way that they did, and that's just how it works, right? But they were just oh so close, and Harden almost got them there, and he was winning MVPs and putting up these huge numbers, and they were contending, and it was fun. And they were innovating on the offensive end, and Mike D'Antoni doing his thing, and Daryl Morey being aggressive as the GM. But all that's over. Unfortunately, everybody's gone. They've torn this roster down to the bare bones. There's nobody left, and you're left with hoping that Christian Wood and Kevin Porter Jr. can be your future franchise guys, and maybe the ping pong balls bounce your way and you get Cade Cunningham in the draft. But even then, the owner's probably not willing to pay for a title level team, so what's the use of hoping? It's a pretty dark place for the Rockets right now. It's unfortunate because they are historically a very competitive franchise. They've won the 2 rings with Hakeem in the 90s, and have competed at every turn of their franchise history. They've had some great players come through Houston, and with the way that ownership is running this team right now, I just can't see them getting back to contention anytime soon, unless Fertitta seriously changes his ways, or the team gets sold again. But that might not be for a very long while. So sorry if you're a Rockets fan, genuinely, I am sorry. But I think that's going to be it on Rockets Roast Fest 2021. I apologize to all you Rockets fans out there. The Heat get themselves a good player, though, so I guess focus on the positive there if you're a Heat fan, because I do like this move a lot for Miami. But yeah, like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to, leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about this move. How does this recontextualize the James Harden trade? Would love to know your thoughts down below. But yeah, with all that said, see you guys in the next one.